diving in today, and we've got quite the figure on our hands. Alexandra Grothendieck. You probably, heard that term mathematical genius just kind of tossed around. But Grothendieck, he truly embodies it. I mean, his work in the 20th century, groundbreaking. But here's the thing, he walked away from it all.
Yeah, that's what's so fascinating, isn't it? To reach those kinds of heights in mathematics, I mean, talk about a field that demands like total immersion, and then to just withdraw, almost unheard of.
Exactly. Like, it's this intriguing puzzle, right? So we're working with these excerpts from a lecture by Alain Kahn, another, huge name in mathematics. And he actually knew Grothendieck personally.
And Kahn is on a mission here. It's not just about explaining Grothendieck's work, but like defending it, especially some of those later writings.
Which, let's be honest, those had some pretty harsh criticism thrown their way.
For sure. Those later writings really shook things up. Kahn describes this one manuscript from Grothendieck, says it was written recto verso without margins. Small detail, right? But it speaks volumes about this guy, this intensity. Even years after stepping away from the spotlight, Grothendieck's wrestling with these, really profound mathematical concepts.
Like, his mind just couldn't let go, even when he tried to distance himself from that formal world of mathematics.
Yeah, and Kahn really wants us to get at the sheer brilliance of Grothendieck's contributions. Even the really complex stuff. He keeps coming back to these two concepts, sheaves and topos.
Okay, gotta be honest, those sound a little more like farming terms to me.
Well, get ready to think about farming in a whole new way. Okay, so imagine trying to understand something massive, intricate, like the internet. You wouldn't stare at the whole thing at once, would you? You'd break it down. Maybe look at how individual websites connect, how data flows between them.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this.
That's what sheaves do for mathematicians. They're tools to analyze these really complex spaces by examining their smaller, interconnected parts.
So instead of getting totally overwhelmed by the whole thing, you focus on the pieces and how they relate.
Exactly. You got it.
It's kind of like understanding a city, not by looking at it on a map, but by walking through each neighborhood and seeing how they all sort of link up, right?
Precisely. You're getting the picture. Now, topos. This one's trickier. But Kahn uses this great analogy, a spacious bed. So picture this. Mathematicians, they had all these different ideas.
Yeah.
Different branches of math, but they didn't always fit together neatly.
Like trying to cram a family reunion onto a tiny cot.
Exactly. So Grothendieck's topos concept, it provided this expansive framework where these seemingly incompatible mathematical concepts could coexist and even interact in new and unexpected ways.
So he basically blew out the walls, created a space where everyone, and I guess every mathematical concept, could just mingle.
Exactly.
And it's interesting how both those concepts, sheaves and topos, they're about finding ways to connect, to make sense of complexity, whether it's in these abstract mathematical spaces or even in the way different mathematical ideas relate to each other.
And here's where it gets really, really interesting. We're not just talking about advances within mathematics itself. Grothendieck's work, especially those ideas behind topos, they start to reach into other fields, like logic.
Okay, now that's just next level stuff.
Even challenges how we understand the very nature of truth.
Wow, so from what we're gathering so far, we have this incredibly brilliant, yet somewhat enigmatic figure who revolutionized math and then walks away.
But it's not just that he walked away. He grappled with his own legacy, with the world that he was a part of. And that's where his personal reflections become essential to understanding the full picture of Alexander Grothendieck.
So to really get inside Grothendieck's head, we have to turn to his own words.
Yeah.
And we've got excerpts from this book, Likez, et mais, which basically translates to reaping and sowing. It's kind of like a memoir, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A very personal reflection on his journey in mathematics and, eventually his disillusionment.
And he talks about his early days in Paris. He gets there in 1948. So he's 20 years old, practically self-taught with a degree and a manuscript already on measure theory. But he even admits, I didn't even know what a topological space was.
Oh.
And he's thrown into this world, right, leading mathematicians, including this super influential group, the Bourbaki group. And they were known for their, intense rigor, their abstract approach.
Incredibly influential in shaping the field. Their whole thing was pushing the boundaries of abstraction and rigor. Hard to imagine someone like Grothendieck feeling like an outsider there.
Right, but he's really open about how much he didn't know at first. He's drawn to these lectures. Mathematicians like Henri Cartan and Jean Leray, but even says he couldn't follow everything.
But something about it resonated with him.
Yeah. Like, he was drawn to their passion. He says he never felt, like, looked down upon, even though his questions, probably showed how much catching up he had to do.
That's interesting. A real sense of, like, intellectual generosity. They saw his potential, his eagerness, and it seems like that mattered more than where he was at in that particular moment. And to think within a few years, he's like leading the charge, reshaping the field in these profound ways with his work on sheaves and topos.
Talk about a transformation. But then, as we know, things change. This sense of belonging that he'd found, it starts to unravel. And that's where the title of his book, Récolter-semer, that reaping and sowing, it becomes like really crucial to understanding his story.
It really gets at the heart of his disillusionment, right? There's some belief that the negative experiences he had later on, the betrayals, weren't just random. He saw them as a direct consequence of the seeds he himself had sown, like during his time as a leading figure in mathematics.
He's basically saying that he helped create the very environment that turned on him.
It's a really complex and, let's be honest, pretty painful realization.
Yeah.
And it adds another layer to this whole decision to withdraw, right? It's not just this genius turning his back on his field. It's a deep disillusionment with the structures, the power dynamics of that world. And, he'd helped build that up. But now he finds himself at odds with the very thing he created.
Wow. That adds a whole other layer of, tragedy to his story. But to understand Grothendieck's choices, his life, we need to go back even further. And for that, we have excerpts from another one of his books. This one's called La Clef des Songes. It translates to The Key to Dreams. And in this one, he digs into his family history. And, well, it's every bit as unconventional and fascinating as Grothendieck himself.
Yeah, his parents, despite not being mathematicians themselves, they had this huge impact on him. You can't really separate their story from the forces that shaped his worldview.
Okay, talk about coming from different worlds, right? You've got his father, a Russian Jewish anarchist, imprisoned for years under the Tsarist regime, and his mother, from this once affluent German Protestant family. And both of them are trying to find their place in this really tumultuous period, early 20th century Europe. It's a lot.
And what really strikes me is how they were both gifted with words. Neither one pursued it as a profession, but they had this way with language, a certain a literary flair that Grothendieck clearly inherited.
Yeah, almost like this, I don't know, this well of creativity, right?
Right.
But it expressed itself in different ways, and it kind of shaped Grothendieck's own path, but indirectly.
Yeah, I get it.
And it makes you think, what if he'd grown up surrounded by words instead of equations? How different would things have been?
It's an interesting question. And, it kind of speaks to this thing that Grothendieck wrestled with himself, this sense of an unexpressed legacy, this inheritance that was kind of hidden, passed down through his family.
And you really see that in this story he tells about his father in prison.
Yeah.
So after years of just awful treatment, his father has this profound experience, a spiritual experience. He describes it as this moment of absolute illumination, just this wave of light, filling his prison cell, washing away the pain, the suffering.
It's powerful imagery.
Really is.
And it's important to remember the context here.
Yep.
Because Grothendieck's father, by this point, had long rejected organized religion. So
Yeah.
this wasn't some kind of, traditional conversion. It
Right.
was something way deeper, an experience of pure truth that went beyond any kind of doctrine or belief system.
And get this, he never told anyone. He kept this life-altering thing totally to himself, like a hidden jewel,
Yeah.
And Grothendieck, it really got to him. He wondered, was he, through his own work, his math, was he giving voice to that potential he saw in his father, this brilliance that had been silenced?
It's a question that really stays with you, isn't it? And
Yeah.
it brings us back to where we started today, to Alexander Grothendieck, the breakthroughs, this really complicated relationship with his field, and this profound influence of his family.
It's quite a story, right? I mean, we've gone from these huge mathematical ideas, sheaves and topos, to these deeply personal reflections, family, truth. Grothendieck's story, it reminds us that even these brilliant minds, they're shaped by things beyond their control, by the past, family secrets. It really makes you think.
It does. It makes you wonder how our own stories, the ones we inherit, are influencing our paths. Maybe in ways we don't even realize.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder that. Thanks for joining us today as we explored the legacy of Alexander Grothendieck, a true and maybe even reluctant icon.